Here we go. Well, welcome to the podcast, Gianni. It's a pleasure to have you. I think to start, just what do you think people need to know about strength training and just exercise in general? Like, what are some things, the big things?
The big things.
Yeah.
I think the first thing that people should acknowledge is that it's for everyone, period.
Yeah.
Everyone needs it. There's no way to out-age the need to resistance train. Even being young, like I've had kids that were 6, 7, 8 years old starting to do some type of resistance training or movement training. There's always a need for it, and there's always a purpose for it. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I personally find.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I've found, I think a lot of people enjoy exercising, and especially weightlifting. I think that's something that a lot of people get a lot out of. So why do you think there's a large amount of people out there who think that it's exclusive or should be exclusive?
I think there's a big misconception for what the purpose of it is, mostly because of the bodybuilding era. And a lot of the times what I've seen people say is, I don't want to get too big, or like, I shouldn't be back squatting, I'm 60 years old, or anything like that. There's a notion that there's only a finite amount of things that we can do, and they just haven't been exposed to what it actually means or what it is. And that's where like functional strength is different than a bodybuilder's version of a program or a power lifter's version. I'm not going to have a 70-year-old person doing a clean and jerk. That would just be stupid. Like there's good coaches understand how to program for everyone around them, and the general population doesn't quite know that's how it works.
Yeah.
So we need to talk about that.
It sounds like a lot of people have this idea that if you're going to weightlift, then that just has to mean you're going to be roided up and looking like Arnold or something, some crazy physique, when in reality it's, I mean, in my experience, that's not the case. You won't get too big. That's
it's not possible.
That one's ridiculous. Without steroids, but you know that you probably shouldn't be taking those to begin with. And then
I've been working out for 14 years, and I'm just happy with where I'm at. And that's the thing. It's like strength, muscle size. It takes a certain level of consistency, and the extremes that people see is because these people have been on such an intense regimen for such a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
The people that are looking at it for health purposes do it completely different. It's a different time frame that they do. They're still able to enjoy their life. And I've heard a couple different things on that side where it's like, I don't want to be one of those people that's constantly in the gym just to meet my goals. It's like, in order to meet your goals, maybe you just need 3 times at 45 minutes for resistance training to hit your goal.
Yeah. I mean, like you said earlier, there's a lot of personalization, I think, that needs to go into strength training, because I do talk about this on my exercise episode. It's hard to talk about general advice because depending on where you're at, what your goals are, it's going to be different. You know, if you do want to be a bodybuilder, like, you're going to need to be in the gym like 2 or 3 hours a day, serious cut bulk cycles. But if you just want to, you know, be able to lift some heavy boxes for your family or pick up your grandkids, like that's a whole different, you don't have to be quite as intense.
And we deal with a lot of people that have pain, and a lot of people that have pain have been told to not exercise or to stop doing certain things. It's like, well, actually, one of the best things that you can do is to continue moving and to load the tissue. If you don't load the tissue, it's not going to get back to normal. So you get people that have like 5, 10, 15-year-old chronic pain conditions musculoskeletally because they haven't reloaded the tissue how it's supposed to be loaded, and their body's compensated around it. And resistance training is one of the things that can correct it. Yeah,
tell me a little bit more about that, because I've definitely come across a lot of research that indicates that weightlifting is super beneficial for chronic pain. I mean, I've had back pain for 6 years, and lifting has definitely helped with it. But on like the physiological, sorry, you cut out for a second there. On the physiological and mechanical side, like what's actually going on and like what's the research to back it?
So the level of depth that I'm able to go into is completely different than a physical therapist. I will say that. But I want you to think about the different components of a muscle, right? One, you have the different types of collagen fibers that go through it. So our fascia, which I want you to think like a web that overlays the muscle tissue that connects to more than just that individual muscle. So the fascia that connects from the top of our foot that goes up the tibialis anterior could be the same fascia that crosses the knee into the quad. Just an example. That type of fascia is the same kind of connective tissue that makes up tendons and ligaments. So one type of pain that can happen, let's say from an impact, if you get hit really hard and it disorganizes this fascia, so that webbing that's nice and neat is now kind of discombobulated a little bit. Those can also be known as trigger points if those are formed. But getting that to be worked out needs to have some type of load to reorganize the tissue. So you could do stuff like eccentric loading to where you're breaking down muscle tissue and fascial tissue so that it has a chance to reheal in a more organized fashion. So that's one thing. Another thing is neuromuscular. So we have these little components inside of the muscle called muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs in the tendon. Muscle spindles react to extreme stretch. So the faster you stretch a muscle, the more it will react. That's why we have something called the stretch shorten cycle. This is just textbook. If, let's say, a muscle overstretches faster than what it's capable, then it will want to react. And that's where we typically see muscle pulls, right? Yeah. This muscle will react and it will want to shorten. And for some people, it might become more of a chronic issue if they become to favor that leg and shift onto another side. If you overload a tissue, like let's say too much weight, the Golgi tendon organ is supposed to say, hey, I'm not able to handle this load, and it will turn off the neurological component to that muscle so that you bail or fail to lift that thing. Like if you go to pick up a car, but you're not in this high stress environment, your body's going to be like, no, I'm not going to do this. You're going to tear everything. So the Golgi tendon organ decreases the stimulus that muscle's able to get. Now there's other extremes where, let's say you go into a landing from a really high box. You're not used to it. You've done like maybe 15, 20 inch box drops landing on the ground, but you're playing around with some friends, you're goofing off in the gym, whatever that looks like, and you jump onto a 40-inch box and you go to jump off of it. Let's say your patellar tendon is unable to handle that load, and you do this because you're just messing around. There's no adrenaline into it, so it's not ready to take that kind of reaction. When you land, it tries to take all of that load. So you can tear a ligament or a tendon or muscle tissue if it's overloaded. So it breaks the stimulus of the Golgi tendon organ. When that happens, it takes a very long time to rehab. And the situation is kind of the same. You have to get the muscle spindle to understand, yes, I can re-lengthen to the position I was again. For the Golgi tendon organ, it's like, yes, I can reload this tissue. You don't have to protect it anymore. So it's all about reprogramming how the nervous system is able to integrate into that muscle, tendon, ligament.
Okay, so right. It sounds like, so a one-time injury like that can, at least for a period of time, reprogram the neurological like innervation of the muscles. Is that about right? Okay.
Yep. That's why like people that get into car accidents have long-term chronic pain. It's because it wasn't addressed correctly because of all the things that happen in a car accident. It's psychological. So it could be, I'm going to forget the name of it right now. I was talking about it a couple days ago where it's more somatic. It'll come back to me eventually. Yeah. But it's all based on how your perception of something is now deep rooted in emotion. And that's why the pain doesn't go away. So
So
it's
your
more,
perceptions of it affect the pain.
yes.
Yeah,
It could make it worse based off of personal perception,
that does track.
or emotional tie-in.
Yeah. So okay, let's lot of things already. So we
There's a
have
ton.
we have the muscles and the fascia running through them, and those if they get damaged can be repaired. I didn't know that the fascia can be repaired. Is because you said it's a similar.
It's connective tissue.
Yeah, it's in connective tissue like ligaments, tendons. Those generally don't get a whole lot of blood supply. Is that
They
the
don't
case
get a whole lot of blood
for
supply
fascia as
depending on the
well?
location,
Okay.
but they do heal.
Okay, I see. And then I guess let's start there. What would be the best way to, if you do have an injury, like a damaged muscle, to heal that and the fascia through strength training? Like let's take like back pain, as someone with back pain. Like what's the best
Chronic
approach?
versus acute. I can't do acute.
Okay.
So I can talk about chronic. Acute basically means like if you fall and you break something, so you fracture something in your hip and now the muscle tissue is reacting to it. If you try and do anything around that, you're going to have a problem.
So like when I fell skiing and broke my back, that might not be your wheelhouse quite as much. And I have chronic pain because of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the chronic pain is dealable with strength and conditioning. Acute stuff has to go to physical therapy.
Okay.
Physical therapy, surgery, whatever is required based on whatever happened for the injury. There's different grades of tears. So if a grade 1 tear is very minor and typically takes like 2 to 6 weeks to heal, depending on what muscle it is.
Okay.
A grade 2 tear is if the tissue has some separation, but it's not 100% torn apart. So let's say like the ACL, a grade 1 tear of the ACL is just a little bit of fraying. A grade 2 is almost completely torn, but it's still held together. A grade 3 is it is snapped. You are not repairing that unless you go in and get a new one attached.
Yeah.
Exactly. So grade 1 and grade 2 can typically heal itself as long as you take the right protocols based on the physical therapist. Okay. And a lot of it typically revolves around re-strengthening and stabilizing the muscles around that joint.
Okay. Yeah, that tracks. How does that heal? Because this is something I've always kind of wondered. If you have a torn ACL and they put a new one in, how does strengthening the quads, the hamstrings, the calf muscles, how does strengthening those help? Or if you have lower back pain, strengthening the back muscles, or hip pain, strengthening the hip intrinsic, shoulder pain, strengthening the rotator cuffs. Like how does that actually work, I suppose?
I'll approach this in 2 different ways.
Okay.
The first one is articulation. So let's say you have chronic shoulder pain, right? And let me see if I could use my hands as a good demonstration for this.
Okay.
If this is your glenohumeral joint, right? And this is the humerus getting sucked up into that space. There's the labrum in there. You have your rotator cuff, which are 4 muscles that attach to the humerus that allow free movement of that joint. Well, if we turn to the side, let's say this area is where your pec is, and this area is where your back is. Let's say the muscles that are attached to the humerus are shifting it forward in the socket. And now you're getting a constant grinding down of the tissue in that front area. And you're like, man, for some reason, I feel like it's like too much pressure and I can't really move my shoulder very well, or I have pain in the front of the shoulder. And it's based on articulation, then strengthening the rotator cuff, like your infraspinatus, the one in the back of the shoulder blade, strengthening your back more, decreasing the amount of tension in your pec by doing trigger point release and decreasing some of the nervous tension in the anterior part of your body can help shift it back into space.
Okay.
So now it can articulate better. So, and that's just a very small local example. It takes much more than just that, because you're also talking about how the shoulder blade moves, how the rib cage moves, how the spine moves, everything that goes into how the shoulder actually articulates.
Well, this is probably why it's so important to work out the whole body, because if you're just going to the gym every day, hitting chest and triceps and bicep, arm day, you're going to have well, first of all, the aesthetic part is going to be kind of discrepant looking across your whole body, which, there's that, and that's always a funny thing that guys at the gym don't want. But I think more than that, if you have these inequalities in the muscles, then that actually sounds like it might have some physiological impacts. Whereas if you're doing all the little, silly exercises to strengthen all the small muscles, you'll have a more balanced set of muscles.
I wouldn't even say silly exercises. There's a stability and there's a stability continuum of exercises. Right?
How do you mean stability continuum?
There is the most stable that you could put a movement, and then the least stable that you could put a movement.
Okay.
The most stable of something is a machine. It is on a specific track. There is no way that you can move around it like a dumbbell.
Yeah.
It is in one plane. It is the most stable that range of motion is going to be. Mm-hmm. Then there is the least stable, where you are 100% solely reliant on your ability to do the exercise perfectly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we take like a row, for example, you can do a seated row where you have your chest on a pad and the hand is on a track basically to pull the weight towards you. Mm-hmm. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you could do a single leg RDL to single arm row. It is an incredibly unstable exercise where the purpose of it is to increase stability of the hip, core, and shoulder while doing a rowing action. What's going to build more muscle? Obviously, the machine one. The more stable that you can perform something with more load, the more muscle tissue breakdown that you can get.
Yeah.
But how do you get more of the small muscles integrated into a movement pattern so that you can strengthen everything around it? Well, you go into the less stable side of the continuum. The problem is a lot of people that have gotten into this functional strength side of things decide, well, we don't like machines because they're useless. It's like, that's false. Yep. Machines are actually incredibly useful. And they put everyone on the exact opposite end. They go into this remarkably unstable, standing on a basketball, doing some type of back jump bull crap.
Yeah.
It's like, that's actually not doing anything for them either. Mm-hmm. There's this really nice middle ground of functional training that you can do that can help increase strength. It doesn't increase muscle size, but it gets people out of pain faster because you're teaching them how to rotate and move effectively.
You said that's what we want. Does not increase muscle size, or does?
It does.
Okay, I was going to say I'm not confused how you could do strength without muscle size, but no, okay.
Yeah. So you could increase strength, muscle size, improve motor quality, so movement quality, and make sure that you are in less pain going forward. Machines are really helpful if you already have pain. And let's say you have knee pain and you're trying to reload the patellar tendon because you've been running for a long time and you just started having pain in the front of your knee. It's like, okay, something that you can do to help reload that tissue again is a leg extension or a single leg press. You don't have to do a single leg squat on something that it's not able to handle yet. So machines are able to decrease the amount of load on a very stable surface so that you can progressively increase it over time to get back to the compound movements that you're used to doing.
Yeah.
So there is a purpose for everything. If you want at the end of a workout, let's say, like for me, I like to do more of the functional side of training, mostly barbells and dumbbells. But at the end, if I want to increase muscle size or strength because I have a lagging muscle group, I can use a machine for that. There's a purpose for it in our compound training. I do it with athletes all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like anything else in life, you have to have a balanced approach. It's not going to be all free weights all the time. If it's the kind of thing you wouldn't do in the jungle as a monkey, then it's not a useful movement, then on the other end, you have the super bodybuilders who are like, I need to just work out, my palmaris longus or my adductor digiti minimi, or like the individual muscles. You have these two ends of the spectrum, and it's somewhere in the middle. You need to have both going on. You brought up the term functional lifting, functional weight training.
Lifting. Yeah.
How would you define that?
Well, what is function in itself? Function is the ability to do something.
Yes.
That's it. So this whole functional training dilemma came about because there's bodybuilding, there's powerlifting, there's Olympic lifting, there's specific tracks that people have gone down. So the idea of functional training is that it mimics the lifestyle, and that's how you train. But it's become bastardized and turned into like CrossFit, now High Rocks, and all this other stuff. So functional training in itself literally just means training to improve your ability to do something. That's what it's supposed to mean.
Yeah.
But that's not how social media and the internet talks about it. So when I talk about functional training, I'm talking about we are looking at whatever someone's goal is, and we're understanding where they're currently at.
Yeah.
From that, what do we need to program right now to get them to the next point so that we can progress them to the next point so eventually we can reach their goals with whatever that looks like. What are they able to do? How are they able to do it? Is it a speed or a power issue? Is it a muscular size issue? Is it a weight loss issue? Is it a just ability to walk issue? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And how do we utilize resistance training to improve it?
It sounds like it's a lot more, it hinges a lot more on goal setting as opposed to pursuing this arbitrary thing of I need to pick this heavy weight up in this specific motion and I need to improve how many pounds I pick up every week for some reason, versus functional is focused more on I want to just feel good every day. I don't want to feel like gassed when I go up the stairs, or I'm a college kid, I'm moving around a lot. I don't want to move and have it be this awful hassle where I'm dying at the end of the day because I can't lift, or like you said, just walking or doing your job. Maybe you work at a moving, or rather like UPS or something, like a postal company. It's a lot more focused on real world goals.
Exactly. Ability, and I always like to think about those deep intrinsic motivators. Like for some people, they do have a deep intrinsic motivator for why they are doing bodybuilding or powerlifting. But most people are not that way. The problem is a lot of these programs have come from people that were that way. It's not coming from normal people wanting to do normal things that have developed this and became more quote unquote like social media famous. The people that have become social media famous have a body that allows them to easily gain a following,
and then they put out a workout program, and you just want to have a functional workout program, but this guy's putting out a program and you're like, oh, he looks good, so
they'll call it functional,
but it's
program, but it's the same thing as a bodybuilding program from 20 years ago.
How would you say social media has influenced how people lift, their perceptions on lifting, body image? I know this
awful. This is a huge question. We could have a whole conversation just on this.
I know.
Social media is the bane of my existence. To say lightly.
Very dramatic.
being very honest. No, social media is awful. For one specific reason. People think that's where facts come from.
Or reality comes from.
Yeah. So they spend a lot of time on it. It sucks a lot of their like personal ability to do stuff outside of it, which is kind of scary. But then people believe that the stuff that they see on it are factual. When you don't have to have a degree to talk about fitness on social media. You don't have to have any kind of a following or any kind of a know-how. Even you don't need a certification to talk about nutrition on social media. You could be lying about everything or believing everything you're saying, but it not being true, and gain a massive following. And that's what we see a lot of these. There's a lot of very famous social media quote unquote nutritionists or quote unquote longevity specialists that are trying to sell their Kool-Aid because they had this concept idea that they personally firmly believed in, but is not rooted in science at all. And they will try and use every fancy type of terminology that other people don't know to get buy-in because it makes them sound smart.
They use word salad to sound intelligent. They have presumably a very good physique, which that's another thing about social media that I think it's being talked about more in some circles, which is good, but you need to understand that when you go on Instagram and you follow these fitness influencers, there's probably like three things going on. Number one is they have top 1% genetics, and you may or may not have top 1% genetics, and if you don't, that's fine. You can be healthy. Number two, they are possibly on steroids. There's probably a lot of fake natties out there, so what they have probably isn't even achievable. And then what was the third one? I forget the third one, but those two are pretty good. They have the physique. They might be on steroids, genetics, and and then they have this egregious amount of time that they put into it that you just don't see.
I was going to also say they might alter the photos.
That too.
Or alter the videos, so use filters.
Mm-hmm.
And
Photoshop.
That's very, very common. Very
lighting,
common.
They had a pump. There's like a million and one things that go into these pictures on Instagram, and they probably don't even look like that on a day-to-day basis.
No, they definitely don't. It's hilarious.
Mm-hmm. So, but you have young guys, young girls looking at this, and they're like, they believe that they can achieve this because this person says X, Y, and Z, and it's lying,
Yeah,
especially when
I want to be like X.
Mm-hmm. Especially when they do
like,
edit the photos or their fake natties or whatever.
Yep. And what it honestly does is when the people that aren't able to achieve it, or they've tried really hard to achieve it, they start getting like body dysmorphia. They get eating disorders, and it drives them. Like a lot of the guys I know are driven to do some type of drug because they know, well, that person's probably on tren. Might as well start doing tren so I can look like that. It's like, okay, you're not even putting in the effort to look like that.
Yeah.
Like we can't do anything about that other than utilize our own social media to counter it.
Yeah.
And that's the worst part, is that we also have to play the same game they are in order to counteract what they're doing.
Yeah. That's kind of the position I find myself in. And it's like, I try to post and ghost on Instagram and just put it out there, or YouTube or Spotify, I do use Spotify, which not so social media-y, but with the main social medias, I try to post and ghost because I know it's not good to spend time on those apps, but I think it is important that we try to spread the right stuff out there.
And when you find someone that is putting out the right stuff, support them.
Yeah.
And you can tell that the stuff that they're saying is, or at least them as a person, is probably more trustworthy if they literally say it in the video.
How do you mean?
So, who was it? So Lane Norton, for example, he said in a video, he was like, a few years ago, he was on this like anti-added sugars kick, right? Well, I wouldn't say a kick. That was like one of the things that he always talked about. And recently he came out, he was like, listen, I look back at my stuff and I realized I was completely wrong. New research came out that counteracted the facts I was talking about. So I want to get on here and own up to it. And this is what the new data says.
So owning up to your mistakes.
Owning up to your mistakes, or ability to change and recognizing why. Not changing because you've been proven so wrong because they've been attacking you.
Yeah,
for
you
example,
just dig in your heels.
Yeah, like someone that's been.
What was that one? Turkesterone or that one that was floating around? Did you hear about that?
Oh, jeez, no.
So yeah, there's
too many things floating around.
Yeah, this was a supplement going around the fitness channels. People were talking about it. Apparently, it boosted testosterone, and a couple of channels I think picked it up, smacked a label on it, started selling it, and then the research came out, and it's like inconclusive at the very best, but probabilistically a lot more likely that it just didn't do anything. And a lot of the people didn't reverse their opinions. Some of them did, and I think that's just one of those examples.
I will say, when it comes to supplements, if it's not whey protein, creatine, or added fiber.
Yeah, I think caffeine is good. Caffeine helps with.
Caffeine is good.
Yeah.
Some people have to be careful depending on their situation. But
Of course.
just like in general, the most researched supplements, well, are basically those three: creatine, whey protein, and caffeine.
Yeah.
Caffeine, I do warn people about because, like, let's say you're an athlete and you're in the collegiates, it is actually banned by the NCAA rules.
Really?
If your blood level is above a certain level of caffeine when they take it. So you do have to be careful. And I think it turns out to be like 350, is it milligrams?
Yes.
That you take?
Yeah.
350 milligrams at one time can spike your blood to the level of that based on your weight.
And that's
but
like
you do have to be careful with
that's like what the crazy energy drinks are at, the Bangs and the Reigns. That's how much, or even the pre-workout that I buy has 350 per scoop, and I'm like, that's just
But the thing
absurd.
is, the levels that you actually have to intake of caffeine to get the dramatically improved focus that almost like not parallels Adderall, but makes it feel like you're on more of a quote unquote drug like effect is in that 350 to 400 milligram range. It's really high.
And that's also
really high.
And that's also like the upper limit that's recommended by the FDA or whoever does that, which you know, you want to limit the caffeine use because heart problems and all the other stuff. So it
and
does
the other
get
thing
dicey
is
with
you
that.
become dependent. It's another dependency that happens. So if you're used to taking, like, let's say drinking 3 cups of coffee, so like 210 to 240 milligrams of caffeine a day, your body's going to get used to it. And then you're going to have more just to get the same effect. So your body starts going into this almost down cycle of adrenaline. So you have to take more in order to recoup that back in. Good thing is it only takes 10 days for it to like shuttle out to reset.
Yeah.
But like I have little caffeine tablets where it's like, if I need something, if I need a little boost, like I'll just take that and it'll give me that little added thing, but then I won't take it for a few days.
See, that's some self-control that I definitely don't have. I wake up early for work. I wake up at like 5 a.m. So there's no way I'm doing shit that day if I wake up that early without some caffeine. But you know, there's the whole adenosine cleansing. So where if you wake up in the morning and push the caffeine intake out an hour, that's going to be good too. But yeah. So we have creatine, whey, possibly caffeine.
But those are the most researched ones. If it's anything outside of that, then be wary of it.
I think, have you come across examine.com?
Like X-Amin, or is it EXAMIN?
I think it's it's spelled EX.
It actually is spelled. No, I haven't.
It's a really good website. It is. You can look up any supplement, or I think it might even have drug studies on there, but I mainly use it for supplements. And you put it in.
What is actually in there?
It gives it like a rating, A, B, C, D, E, F, you know.
Okay.
And
this is what I think a couple of my RD friends use to get the right fish oils.
Yeah. And you just, you put the supplement in and it tells you if the supplement's worth it. Salt gives you the studies for it. I think there's some paid features, but you can get the gist of it for free, which I found to be really useful because I take a handful of supplements and I always cross-check them on there. So
yeah. And then like one of the things that I always think about is not just like, is the supplement worth its salt, but a lot of supplements are made because people enjoy the feeling of it. So for example, pre-workout, is citrulline malate needed?
No, it maybe adds like 2% boost, maybe.
Yeah, if that. There's a lot of stuff that are in these products where it's like, is it actually needed to give you the effect that you think it's going to, or does it just feel really good at the time? It's a feeling, it's a sensation that you get.
Yeah.
You feel like you're going to get a better workout using a pre-workout than going in without anything, because it gives you the jitters or like the itchy nose or whatever. You enjoy that feeling when you go into the workout. So yeah, of course you're going to buy more pre-workout.
Yeah.
And those people typically become the testers of all these different types of products because they like the sensation that it gives them. Not that it actually works towards what their goal is, but it gives them that little bit of a mental boost to get there so they could do the workout.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's not a placebo effect because there is something happening, but it's more of a mental hurdle.
Yeah, I think
they utilize it for.
I think a lot of people use it thinking it's going to do more than it does, and what it more likely does is it's probably some sort of Pavlovian or classical conditioning where you take the pre-workout and feel good and associate it with the gym. So you associate the gym with the pre-workouts, you know, some kind of psychological deal as opposed to a pharmacological deal. Because I mean, I take pre-workout, but I admit it to myself, it has beta in it, it has citrulline malate, it has caffeine. I'm like, these pretty much do nothing for how I lift. It just kind of makes me feel hype when I'm at the gym. So yeah. I know that it's not doing a whole hell of a lot, but I think there is some credit to be given for the psychological aspect.
Oh, big time. Like there is a lot of the most bang for your buck that you can get out of supplements for the research that has gone into them is the protein, the creatine, and the caffeine. The biggest.
Yeah.
When it comes to like other small stuff that feels really good, taking something like a pre-workout that gives you this quote unquote like more blood flow, gives a bigger pump, stuff like that feels really good.
Yeah.
Is it going to increase your muscle mass as much as you think? No. Why was it designed? So that the people that have this insane drive, like bodybuilders, to get that one little micro fraction of a percent better than the person next to them on stage. That's what it was for. Because that one little micro of a percent could have been from a pre-workout. That little pump that they got with the high volume stuff that they do gave them that little bit of an edge.
Yeah, but is your guy who's going in there 3 or 4 days a week, just casually going to the gym, is he going to need that extra 1%? No. It's like buying super expensive running shoes so you can run a 5K a couple times a year. It's not really useful.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you have Ehlers-Danlos, EDS type 3.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, how it's impacted your training, and what advice you would give to other people out there with it.
Sweet. So Ehlers-Danlos is a genetic condition that decreases, or let's say like when you're born, you just have less overall collagen in your body. So if you were to give it like a 0 to 100%, you're supposed to be at 100% of collagen in your system when you're born, but maybe it's like 90 or 85%. That's essentially what happens with Ehlers-Danlos. You didn't have all of the collagen formation you're supposed to. So it can present itself in a lot of different ways. So I have Ehlers-Danlos type 3, which is a hypermobility disorder. So like I can take my joints and separate them out. So I don't know if you can see it. So I can separate all of my joints like that. My shoulder subluxes and dislocates all the time. When it got really bad, I was going through a stint where I was really busy, not working out as much. And every now and then, because one of the best ways to retain your strength, if you don't have time, is like once or twice a week, do a heavier load. So like, cool. I was doing some overhead work, went to press overhead, felt like a little cramp in the neck. I'm like, okay, it's fine. Went home, whatever. The next morning, I wasn't able to lift my head. So I had 2 herniations in my neck. And I went to a chiropractor to see if they could like help me figure it out. And she went to do an adjustment, and my head just kept kind of turning. Like there was no stop to how far my neck could rotate. And she was like, let me see something real quick. So she tested a couple things. I did a general hypermobility assessment. And she asked me how long I've been like this mobile for. And I was like, all my life. I used to be able to take my finger and fold it onto the back of my hand and take my leg and stick it behind my head. Easy. My party trick now is being able to do the splits when I'm on the dance floor at a wedding.
That's pretty cool.
Right? Without any training whatsoever. I could just do it.
That's
impressive. But that's because like if you have less collagen in your system and you're hypermobile, your tendons and your ligaments can just stretch.
Mr. Incredible.
It's like a heated
Mrs.
rubber
Incredible.
at that point.
Yeah.
So essentially, my joints have a really hard time staying in place. The best thing to do for that is resistance training.
Okay.
Consistent resistance training to increase stability of the muscles around the joint.
Because the muscles aren't stretchy.
The muscles are not stretchy.
Yeah.
The muscles have a fixed range of motion. The nerves have a fixed range of motion, but the tendons and the ligaments do not. So the only way for me to, like, let's say I have pain and I'm trying to get out, I get to trigger point, but I'm not allowed to stretch.
Okay.
If I stretch, then I increase the risk of causing subluxations.
What are those?
If this is that glenohumeral joint and this is a shoulder, it slides out.
Oh, okay.
And comes back in. So like if I'm doing an overhead press and my shoulder joint decides to slip out really quick, and like my body is just like, nope, you're done. It'll drop the dumbbell. And I just have to like put it back in.
Yeah.
It's not fully dislocated, but it'll sublux. It'll just slide right out of spot.
Okay, I see.
So Ehlers-Danlos completely changes how we lift in terms of what we need to monitor, because we can go through a really far range of motion.
I would imagine.
You see people do Jefferson curls where they're able to do a RDL, they fold their back, they fold their hips, and they're able to put their head between their legs because they've trained the muscles to get that long. Someone with Ehlers-Danlos can just pick up a bar and do it. But is that the best for them? No, because they probably have some subluxed vertebrae and the hips at the bottom range. Their knees might be hyperextended to get there. Like, there's things that we do to compensate that normal people can't do.
So do you almost have to limit the range of motion?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I love floor presses or bench pressing to a rack. So you stop at the pins. When I back squat, I stop myself at a certain range. If I'm trying to load the tissue in an extended range of motion, I decrease the load. I'm not going maximal in those end ranges, but I'm training my tissue to be like, hey, if you get here, then you can actually have the strength to move out.
Yeah.
So there's different things and tactics that you can use in order to improve your ability to handle EDS.
Okay. So lower weights at the higher range of motion, and if you're doing heavier weights, just limit the range of motion.
Essentially, yeah.
Put it simply, I suppose. Interesting. You've mentioned this a couple times with the pressure point stuff. What is that?
Trigger point?
Trigger point.
So
that's it.
Trigger point, quote unquote, trigger point therapy is what it's coined. You're not actually targeting trigger points. It's called self-myofascial release.
Okay.
So fascial tissue, like I talked about earlier, can become disorganized. This disorganization can create these pressure points that might not be trigger points, but it's restrictive tissue. So you can use like a lacrosse ball to go through the muscle tissue and find these restrictive points that have a pain sensation. So all that you're doing is finding a pain sensation using a ball. You're increasing the length of the muscle spindle so that it understands, oh, I get it. I can be here at this extended range. I don't have to be locked up and short.
Okay. So it's
not a trigger point.
Okay, so
it's restrictive tissue.
Is that if you have a, so like a muscle knot or like a tight muscle, quote unquote?
Essentially.
Yeah. Okay, and then you just get in there and stretch it out to tell it like, hey, you don't have to be this uptight right now.
Release, so myofascial release versus stretching.
Okay.
If you stretch, you're taking a muscle through a full range of motion by moving the articulation, right? So you're trying to take it through a full range of motion to stretch it. Self-myofascial release, it could be in a completely neutral position. So I'll be right here, my upper trap is not lengthened at all, and I will apply pressure using something in order to release tissue.
Okay, I see.
And I do want to make it clear, you are not getting rid of trigger points. You're not targeting trigger points, which is like this bundle of tissue. It takes so much pressure in order to actually get rid of scar tissue that's embedded in there, but you can release the sensation of the tissue around it by helping it understand neurologically that it's okay. So that's what we're doing. We're decreasing that neurological component to the muscle tissue.
Okay, I see. Is that related at all to dry needling?
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of. Dry needling actually does go into more adhesions that are in the tissue, and you can actually cause scraping. You create. So for the viewers, dry needling has these little barbs at the very end of a needle that they floss into a muscle, and then they keep it at it's gnarly. They keep it at a specific depth.
Yeah.
Yep. The point is to increase inflammation in that area. So, and what inflammation does is it rushes a lot of other metabolites in there to incorporate this healing process. So if you have scar tissue in this muscle, then you can actually go in, floss it through, rush a bunch of nutrients into it, and get this healing process to happen. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense, because I've had that before, and I was just like, oh, this hurts, but I feel kind of good afterwards.
Yep.
And then they do the electroshock. I had the electroshock too. So they get in there, they, abuse my back with the needle, and then they turn the electricity on, and it's
so that's for that's the neurological component to it. So the second thing that it can do is very similar to self-myofascial release, where you're getting it to understand that it can relax in this position. So you can use dry needling for that component.
Okay, I see.
And it's all based on different restrictive points, meridians. If they find trigger point locations that have a little bit more of a bump to it, like all that stuff is a part that they can use.
Okay, I see. Very cool. So you have your own strength and conditioning business where you coach people, correct?
Yes, sir.
So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me, I guess, what kind of clients you have and how you help them.
So my company is BioElite Training Systems, and just as a little background, because I realized I didn't do an intro.
Yeah.
When I first started in the industry, I started off being an intern at one of the most well-known strength conditioning companies ever, which is awesome. It's called Exos. I worked with professional athletes, collegiate athletes. I had a couple of Olympians that I worked with, and I also worked with some general population. I worked with Exos for about 6 months in that capacity, and I did not want to be in the professional realm. So I transitioned more towards the corporate realm, where I was helping people go from physical therapy into their workspace without pain. So I was in this kind of intermediate space already, which is awesome. When I was doing that, it was that plus just general health and fitness. I would talk to them about their nutrition, hydration, talk to the registered dietitians in conjunction with that. So I was a great intermediary between all of these different health professionals for these individuals. So in about 2018, I started BioElite Training Systems so that I could work with whoever I wanted. In whatever capacity I chose to. So I do strength conditioning for athletes, whether they be youth, high school, collegiate. I typically stay away from professional unless the professional specifically seeks me out. I'm not seeking others out. My bread and butter are the people that have some type of chronic pain that have been trying to get better, but they have not found any solution for it. Those are the people that we work with best.
Okay.
The concepts that we use and the systems that I created and developed across the past, 7 years, 8 years. It's too long. The past 7 years have helped me be able to teach other coaches to do the same work that I do. And I can develop any type of program for any type of client. So I don't restrict what we do. The only type of restriction that we get is the type of people that are sent to us. Yeah.
What would you say the most common, client and most common problem you see is? I mean, you said chronic pain is kind of your bread and butter. Is there any specific kind of chronic pain, or is it just anywhere and everywhere?
Low back.
Yep.
Low back. There are so many factors to lower back pain. There are so many things that can happen to the body that can cause lower back pain. That in general, it is one of the highest. It's one of the highest ranking. How do you say that? It's one of the highest ranking things that people have.
It's one of the most common ailments that they have. Maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the most common ailments.
Yeah.
And it's just because, like, if someone's foot, like, let's say someone gets a high ankle sprain, and now they're shifted away from that foot and they're working on another foot, but they're really active, so they walk a lot. Well, their gait changed. Now their pelvis is rotating differently. Their SI joint is rotating differently because of that. And what happens? The low back is more mobile than it's supposed to be, taking the brunt of that force.
Yep.
The thoracic spine isn't rotating as much as it's supposed to be. So what happens? All the muscles around the lower back start to spasm. And now all of a sudden you're like, I don't know why in my 30s my lower back decided to seize up. It's like, well, it could have been because you changed your motor patterns when you got injured and you were hobbling because of whatever boot that you had on for 6 months.
Yeah, yeah.
And no one ever fixed that motor pattern moving out of it. So we mostly help correct people's motor patterns, teaching them how to move correctly and re-engaging how they move throughout the day just by incorporating strength conditioning.
Okay, how would you change your movement? I mean, is there a specific way to walk or like just stand? I mean, what would that entail?
Depends on the person.
Okay.
Everyone's bones are different. Everyone has different leg lengths and stuff like that, different positions of the pelvis and different things that have happened to them.
I see.
So the best way to think about moving better is there are certain things that you play with. If it doesn't hurt, do it. If it does hurt, don't do it. That should be pretty simple, but you should also train around it. If you have knee pain and doing a leg extension does not hurt you, do the leg extension. You should probably strengthen the muscle around the joint that's hurting. If you have lower back pain, you should probably stabilize the hips and increase your rotation of your thoracic spine.
And what exercises would be good for hip stabilization and spinal rotation?
Hip stabilization, like different iso holds in a split squat, lateral lunges. A lot of people don't do lateral stuff. They stay in the sagittal plane, so they just keep going straight forward. Not many people go in the frontal plane, so side to side. So we teach a lot of people how to move to the side, how to rotate effectively. So T-spine rotations, just laying on the ground on your side, knees tucked up, arms in front of you, and you open up like a book. Stuff like that, just to improve your rotation ability. Have you ever done a row where you're rotating your spine, where you're reaching and then you pull back and you go into a thoracic rotation with a row? Not many people do. They just think straight forward and back. That's what rowing is. It's like, no, rowing is this multi-rotational pattern for the scapula and the spine and the rib cage to expand and contract. It does all these different things.
Okay.
Doing some anti-rotation work where maybe you're doing a chest press, but you're only using one dumbbell. Well, that's going to cause the core and the opposite hip to have to work together in order to stabilize the spine.
Okay, because I always see people doing single arm presses and stuff, and I always thought I'm like, why? What's the point? But I guess like you were talking about earlier, you have the super unstable lifts, but those can help strengthen the compensatory muscles, which can be really good.
And I want you to think about this too. If we just take a look at like your traditional, like your bench press, your back squat, your deadlift, people have certain weaknesses there because there's some type of inhibitory factor. If the hips are a little bit shifted on a back squat, do you think they're able to get the most out of that squat? No. So you have to put them under some type of unstable position, unilateral position, in order to strengthen one leg at a time and correct the compensation around it. Now you get them back into their normal back squat. They're more stable unilaterally, so they're going to be even more stable bilaterally. You just increased their back squat because now you created a more stable foundation. If you take a bench press, for example, but they're not able to drive their legs into the ground in order to create stability in the spine because now the glutes are active, well, it's going to have a harder time keeping the core engaged as you press. the more stable the core and the rib cage are, so less movement, the easier it is for the chest to do the work it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use exercises like a hips off bench single arm chest press to engage the whole system, load it up for 5 reps, and now you're creating this incredibly intense movement at a load that is probably quote unquote mediocre to what you would normally do for a bilateral dumbbell chest press. But because you've increased your strength in the continuum of your shoulder, the core, and the hip all in one, now you're able to press better.
Yeah, yeah.
It takes a whole system. It's not just a muscle doing the press. It's a system.
You have to,
and that's where we talk about exactly. That's where we talk about like fascial slings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you increase the tensile ability for these complex patterns to work?
Yeah.
And that's where that comes into play.
So for low back, it sounds like working on the lateral movements to help strengthen the hips, improve the twisting rotational movements.
There's too many things.
Yeah, I'm just trying to like repeat what you said back. I guess these are, I assume you brought them up because they're important. And then I think for me, the way that I'm kind of synthesizing this right now is like, okay, I do these things. I do bench press, I do squat, I do rows. So I think for me, and probably a lot of people who have a pretty standard workout routine, putting exercises in there that you might not think to do that maybe increase the instability so that you have to work those compensatory muscles more, or doing something that works the hip intrinsics more than you're used to. I think that would be my kind of impression of maybe a way that people could implement some of these things a little bit more.
And there's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. Some people think that in order to make something less stable, they stand on a Bosu ball or they have to do something on the stability ball. It's like, no, have you ever just tried doing it with one arm? Or have you ever tried doing it with just one leg? Or in a B stance position where you're 80% on one side and 20% on the other. There's a lot of different ways to quote unquote create instability without completely letting go of stability. And typically all we need is to just reduce the stability of it just enough, and that's good enough. You don't need any more than that. Like Bulgarian split squats, I call them rear elevated split squats. It is technically a very unstable movement. You are on one leg, the other leg is behind you, you're shifted forward, and you're dropping down and coming back up. Pretty unstable. The only way to make that even more unstable is to just not have the back foot elevated. Just do a single leg squat.
Like a pistol squat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like there's ways to go about it where you don't have to make it extreme.
Yeah.
And if you want to make it more extreme than a pistol squat, then you're just showing off for Instagram.
Yeah, no, pistol squats they're tough, man. During COVID, I didn't have access to a gym, so I just worked out at home, and that was one of the things I was proud of during that time. I learned how to pistol squat because you can squat a good amount of weight and still not be able to pistol squat.
Yeah, and there's so much with the hips and how they articulate and certain weaknesses and stuff like that. I always like to tell people that if you're doing anything on one leg or in a split stance like a lunge or a split squat, make sure the hips are level to each other. Because a lot of people, when they start to drop down, like one of the hips drops, and you don't want that because that means your lateral hip stabilizers aren't working as well. Yeah. You instantly drop the hip. So if you're trying to utilize single leg work or single arm work, make sure the actual position of your body is correct, or else you're not doing what you think you're doing. Yeah. If your knee caves in past your big toe, you're not doing what you think it's doing. You're over lengthening the glute. You don't want to over lengthen the glute into internal rotation and then you lose flexion because of it. You want to keep it in line. So when you do go lower and you get true full range of motion for the glute, it's because you have the ability to fold into flexion, not because it's internally rotated. So there's a lot of, when it comes to coaching and seeing things in person, those are things that I look at. Yeah, like it's really hard it's really, really hard to convey that in a social media post because it is a daily thing that we look at and see with a single person that needs to be corrected until that habit of getting the body into the right position happens. The strength of those small muscles happen. So it's not like I basically just do everything on 2 feet. I'm going to go to a goblet single leg squat with my heel elevated. Not quite. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Small progressions.
It's very difficult. And especially when you learn stuff online, I think unfortunately, a lot of the exercise things I've learned have been from the internet. And I think I've done a decent job of filtering out the bad for the good. But one of the most difficult things is watching videos on how to have proper squat form. And then I watch it, I'm like, okay, he does this and I do this. And then I get under the bar and do it. And I'm like, that didn't feel right at all. There's no way that was correct. And then I'll record myself and I'm like, I thought I was doing this other thing. And then I look at it and it's totally different. And I think you're totally right that having someone who actually knows what they're doing there, it can make such a big difference. It can make a huge difference. Yeah. So anyways, I think our time is starting to run out. What's next? What projects are you working on? Where can people find you?
Oh man, what projects are coming up? Something that's under wraps, so I won't let it out yet.
Okay, no worries.
I'll keep that hidden until the next piece.
Yeah.
But people can find me at my website, bebioelite.com. So BEBIOELITE.com. That's an easy way to just kind of see more about what we're about. You can find me on Instagram. My name, Gianni, GIANNI _Del Franco, DELFRANCO, or my business fitness page is BioElite _fitness. So BIOELITE _fitness. Easiest places.
Perfect. Any last thoughts? Anything you think people should hear? People should know?
Don't trust everything on social media.
Yeah.
That's honestly it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really bad coaching cues, bad exercises, bad nutrition conversations, and it's happening all over the place. The only things that you can really trust is if you found someone that actively talks to the people and understands how to relate the science to the thing. That's one thing that I try and do. I don't do as much of the nutrition anymore. I try and stay out of it because I'm not a registered dietitian. I don't really want to talk about it. I like to talk about exercise. I like to talk about form and coaching cues. And if you're doing an exercise, how can you utilize a concept to get you into the right position? So if you find someone that's not in their lane, don't follow their stuff. If you find someone that's an actuary that decides to open this multi-million-dollar nutrition supplement and blood working company, don't listen to them because they don't know jack squat about any of the stuff that they're looking into. They just know how to crunch numbers and determine how long someone might live.
Sell product.
Sell product. That was very specific.
Yes.
But still.
It's a common thing. You hear about all these, blood work companies. I feel like every other podcast I listen to is sponsored by some blood work company, and it's
100%.
Who knows? But it was a pleasure talking with you, Gianni. I'm sure we'll talk again. There's a lot more that we're gonna have to unpack, I think, about exercise and everything else. Yeah,
there's a lot more to unpack.
Yeah, but it was a pleasure talking with you today. Hope you have a good one, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.